"Where are you from?" I ask, my voice cutting through the hum of the city like a knife. New York City never sleeps, does it? The streets pulse with energy. Honking taxis, flickering neon signs, and the rhythmic clatter of footsteps echoing against concrete. But tonight, amidst the chaos, something feels different. Ethan Montgomery adjusted his tailored coat as he stepped out of his black Mercedes, the cold biting at his cheeks. His empire stretched across continents. Yet here he was, standing alone on Fifth Avenue, staring into the abyss of his own emptiness. Money couldn't buy peace no matter how hard he tried. And then he saw her. She sat huddled on the corner, two small figures tucked close to her side. Twin girls, maybe 4 or 5 years old. Their faces pale but radiant with innocence despite the grime smudging their cheeks. They clung to her like lifelines, their tiny hands gripping hers as though afraid she'd disappear. Her name was Emily Carter, or so the scrawled words on her cardboard sign suggested. But it wasn't her name that stopped Ethan dead in his tracks. It was the ring. A simple silver band adorned her finger, catching the light from a nearby lamppost. For a moment, time froze. That ring, it was unmistakable. He'd bought it himself years ago, during a summer that now felt like another lifetime. Ethan's chest tightened as memories flooded back. Memories of laughter, stolen kisses under starlit skies, and promises whispered in the quiet moments before dawn. Promises he had broken. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the girl he once knew. Life had weathered her, etching lines of hardship into her skin. Yet beneath the weariness, there was still a spark. The same spark that had captivated him all those years ago. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. Emily looked up, startled. Her eyes widened briefly before narrowing in suspicion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone guarded but polite. Ethan faltered, unsure where to begin. Instead, he gestured toward a food cart nearby. "Let me get you something warm to eat. For the girls, too." For a split second, he thought she'd refuse. Then she nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling the twins closer. As they ate, Ethan studied her face. The years had been unkind, etching lines of hardship into her skin. Yet beneath the weariness, there was still a spark. The same spark that had captivated him all those years ago. The food cart vendor handed over 3 steaming cups of soup and a bag of warm bread rolls. Ethan carried them back to Emily, his steps deliberate yet hesitant. He felt like an intruder in her world, a man who had everything offering scraps to someone who had nothing. But there was no turning back now. "Here," he said softly, placing the food in front of her. The twins reached eagerly for the rolls, their tiny hands trembling with excitement. Emily hesitated before accepting the cup of soup, her eyes flickering between Ethan and the ring on her finger as if sensing his unspoken questions. "You didn't have to do this," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "But thank you. It's the least I can do," Ethan replied, crouching down to meet her gaze. His tone softened. "What are their names?" Emily glanced at the girls, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "This is Lily," she said, brushing a strand of hair from one twin's face. "And this is Grace. They're beautiful," Ethan murmured, his heart aching at the sight of them. They were so small, so fragile, yet they radiated resilience. It was clear they took after their mother. Emily nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "They keep me going," she admitted quietly. "Even when things get hard." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Ethan wanted to ask more, to pry open the wounds she kept hidden. But he knew better than to push too soon. Instead, he focused on the silver ring glinting under the streetlight. "That ring," he began cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's familiar." Emily froze, her spoon hovering mid-air. For a moment, she looked as though she might deny it. But then she sighed, lowering her eyes. "I thought you'd recognize it," she said, almost to herself. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Emily. Her name slipped out before he could stop himself, raw and unfiltered. Her head snapped up, shock flashing across her features. "You remember? How could I forget?" he countered, his voice thick with emotion. We were something special once. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. That was a long time ago, Ethan. People change. Life changes. I know, he said quickly, leaning closer. And I'm sorry for everything. If I'd known what happened to you. You didn't know because you stopped looking, she interrupted sharply, her defenses rising again. You chose your path and I chose mine. That's how it works, isn't it? Her words stung, but Ethan couldn't argue. She was right. He had walked away without looking back, consumed by ambition and blinded by success. Now, staring into her weary eyes, he realized just how much he had lost. Before he could respond, one of the twins tugged at Emily's sleeve. Mommy, who is he? Grace asked innocently, her wide eyes fixed on Ethan. Emily hesitated, glancing at Ethan before answering. Just someone from a long time ago, sweetheart. Someone who used to be important to Mommy. The weight of her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Used to be important. Not anymore. As the twins finished their meal, Ethan noticed Emily twisting the ring absent-mindedly around her finger. A nervous habit that hadn't changed. That ring meant something to us, Ethan ventured carefully. Does it still mean something to you? Emily stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, with a deep sigh, she slipped the ring off and held it out toward him. Take it, she said simply. What? No. Ethan recoiled, horrified. I didn't mean. It doesn't belong here, she cut in, gesturing to their surroundings. It belongs somewhere else. Somewhere better. Her words struck a chord within him. This wasn't just about the ring. It was about the life she had been forced to leave behind. And suddenly, Ethan understood why fate had brought them together again. The ring sat heavy in Ethan's palm, its cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his guilt. He stared at it, memories flooding back like waves crashing against the shore. That summer, the one where everything had seemed possible, felt both achingly close and impossibly distant. Why did you keep it? He asked finally, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city. Emily hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the twins as they played quietly with crumbs from the bread rolls. Because it reminded me of who I used to be, she admitted softly. Before life broke me. Ethan flinched at her choice of words. Broken. Was that what she thought of herself? The woman sitting before him was far from broken. She was surviving, fighting for her daughters with every ounce of strength she had left. But he could see the cracks beneath the surface, the weight of years spent carrying burdens no one should have to bear. What happened, Emily? He pressed gently, though part of him feared the answer. She sighed, wrapping her arms around herself as if bracing for impact. After you left for that internship in Chicago, I stayed behind. We were supposed to talk every night, remember? You promised you'd call. I know, Ethan interjected, guilt twisting his insides. But work got busy, and you forgot. She finished for him, her tone devoid of accusation but laced with sadness. At first, I told myself it was just temporary, that once you settled into your new job, things would go back to normal. But they didn't. Ethan swallowed hard, recalling the late nights at the office, the endless networking events, and the relentless drive to climb the corporate ladder. Somewhere along the way, he had convinced himself that success justified sacrifice. Now, staring into Emily's weary eyes, he realized how wrong he had been. When I stopped hearing from you, I tried moving on, Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly. I met someone, a man named Daniel. He was charming, persuasive, dangerous. I didn't realize how toxic he was until it was too late. Her words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. What do you mean? He gambled away everything we had, she explained, her fingers tightening around the edge of her soup cup. When I confronted him, he turned violent. I managed to escape with the girls, but not before he drained our accounts and left us with nothing. Ethan's fists clenched involuntarily. Where is he now? In prison for now, Emily replied bitterly. But even locked up, he finds ways to make my life hell. Threatening letters, phone calls. He blames me for ruining his life. Ethan's jaw tightened. The thought of anyone hurting Emily, or worse, the twins, ignited a protective fury within him. "You shouldn't have had to face that alone," he said firmly. "I didn't have a choice," she shot back, her voice breaking. "Do you think I wanted this life for my daughters? Do you think I wanted to beg on the streets while people looked through me like I was invisible?" Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Invisible. That's exactly how he must have made her feel all those years ago when he walked away without looking back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, reaching out instinctively to touch her hand. She pulled away reflexively, but their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the walls between them crumbled. "You can't fix the past, Ethan," she said quietly. "But maybe you can help me protect the future." As Emily spoke, Ethan noticed a shadow move across the alleyway behind her. A figure lingered near the corner, partially obscured by darkness. His instincts screamed danger, but before he could act, the figure disappeared into the night. "Did you see that?" Ethan asked sharply, scanning the area. "See what?" Emily frowned, following his gaze. "Nothing," he muttered, though unease prickled at the back of his neck. Whoever or whatever it wasn't gone for good. Ethan knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could start making things right. That night, as Emily tucked the twins into a makeshift bed of blankets in a shelter, Ethan made a decision. He wasn't going to walk away this time. The next morning, he showed up at the shelter with a plan. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but firm, "let me help you and the girls. Not because I feel guilty, but because you deserve better." Emily crossed her arms, her guard still up. "Help how? You think throwing money at us will fix everything?" "It's not about money," Ethan replied quickly. "I want to give you a fresh start. A safe place to live, a chance to rebuild. No strings attached." She hesitated, studying him carefully. "Why now? After all these years, why do you care?" "Because I should have cared before," Ethan admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "I let ambition blind me, and I lost the most important person in my life. I don't want to make that mistake again." For a moment, Emily didn't say anything. Then she sighed, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "Okay," she said finally, "but only for the girls. They deserve a better life than this." Ethan rented a small apartment for Emily and the twins, fully furnished and stocked with essentials. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm and safe. A far cry from the streets they had called home. "This is too much," Emily said as she stepped inside for the first time, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's not enough," Ethan countered gently. "You've been through so much. Let me do this for you." Over the next few weeks, Ethan visited often, bringing groceries, toys for the twins, and even helping Emily update her resume. Slowly, trust began to grow between them. One evening, as the twins played on the floor with coloring books, Emily looked at Ethan and said, "You've changed." "So have you," he replied with a soft smile. "But some things haven't. Like your strength, your kindness." Emily shook her head, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I'm just trying to survive." "You're doing more than surviving," Ethan insisted. "You're thriving." For them, just as things started to improve, trouble found them again. One afternoon, while Emily was out running errands, a letter arrived at the apartment. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting sent chills down her spine. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message. "You can run, but you can't hide forever." Panic surged through Emily as she crumpled the note in her hand. Daniel was watching. Somehow he had found her. When Ethan arrived later that day, he immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, noticing the tension in her posture. Emily handed him the note, her hands trembling. "He knows where we are," she whispered. Ethan's face darkened. "Don't worry. I'll handle this." "No," Emily snapped, surprising even herself. "You can't fight my battles for me, Ethan. This is my mess." "It's not just your mess anymore," Ethan shot back, his voice firm. "You're not alone this time. We'll face this together." The note was a ticking time bomb, and both Ethan and Emily knew it. For days, they lived on edge, jumping at every knock on the door or unfamiliar voice in the hallway. Emily tried to act normal for the twins' sake, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her calm exterior. Ethan, meanwhile, wasn't about to sit back and wait for Daniel to strike. He hired a private investigator to track down any information about Daniel's activities since his release from prison. What they uncovered chilled him to the bone. Daniel's been released early for good behavior, the investigator reported over the phone. But he's already violated his parole twice, skipping mandatory check-ins and harassing former associates. He's desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. Ethan clenched his fists. Desperation made Daniel unpredictable, and that scared him more than anything. One evening, as Ethan walked Emily and the twins home from the park, a shadow emerged from the alleyway ahead. It was Daniel. His face was gaunt, his clothes disheveled, but his eyes burned with rage. Well, Daniel sneered, stepping into the light. Look who decided to crawl out of the gutter and brought reinforcements. Emily instinctively pulled the twins behind her, her body trembling but resolute. Leave us alone, Daniel, she said firmly. You've done enough. Enough? Daniel laughed bitterly. You ruined my life, Emily. You think hiding behind this rich guy is going to save you. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Daniel and Emily. Back off, he warned, his voice low and steady. You're not welcome here. Daniel smirked, his gaze flicking between Ethan and Emily. Oh, I see how it is. Playing hero now, are we? Let me tell you something. She's poison. She'll drag you down just like she did me. That's not true. Emily shouted, her voice breaking. You destroyed yourself, Daniel. Don't blame me for your choices. Daniel lunged forward, but Ethan intercepted him, shoving him back against the wall. I'm warning you, Ethan growled. Stay away from them, or you'll regret it. For a moment, Daniel hesitated, his bravado faltering under Ethan's unwavering glare. Then, with one last venomous look, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Back at the apartment, Emily collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. The twins clung to her, sensing her distress. I can't keep running, she whispered, her voice hollow. He'll never stop. Yes, he will, Ethan said firmly, kneeling in front of her. We'll make sure of it. I won't let him hurt you or the girls ever again. Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. How? He's always one step ahead. Because we're stronger together, Ethan replied, taking her hand. And because I love you, Emily. I never stopped. Her breath caught, and for a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Let's do this for the girls. Ethan reached out to his lawyer, filing a restraining order against Daniel and alerting the authorities to his parole violations. Meanwhile, he installed security cameras around the apartment building and ensured Emily had a panic button connected to local law enforcement. But the real turning point came when Emily found the courage to speak out. With Ethan by her side, she gave an interview to a local news station, sharing her story and exposing Daniel's abuse. The public response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in, along with offers of help from community organizations. You're braver than you realize, Ethan told her after the interview aired. No, Emily corrected softly. I'm brave because of you. Because you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. The days that followed were tense, but Emily and Ethan refused to let fear dictate their lives. They stuck to a routine, dropping the twins off at daycare, running errands during daylight hours, and staying vigilant. Still, the shadow of Daniel loomed large, a constant reminder that peace was fragile. Then, one night, it happened. Emily was tucking the twins into bed when she heard a noise outside. A scraping sound, like someone trying to force open a window. Her heart raced as she grabbed her phone and pressed the panic button Ethan had installed. Stay here, she whispered to the twins, pulling a baseball bat from the closet. As she crept toward the living room, the front door burst open. Daniel staggered inside, his face twisted with fury. You think you can humiliate me on TV? He snarled, advancing toward her. Before he could take another step, Ethan appeared in the doorway, having rushed over after receiving the alert. It's over, Daniel, he said, his voice cold and commanding. Daniel froze, glancing between Ethan and Emily. You really think you can protect her forever? he spat. I don't have to protect her forever, Ethan replied, stepping closer. Just long enough for the police to get here. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Panic flashed across Daniel's face as he realized he was trapped. In a last-ditch effort, he lunged at Ethan, but Emily swung the bat with all her might, striking him squarely in the chest. Daniel stumbled backward, gasping for air as the sound of pounding footsteps echoed in the hallway. Moments later, officers stormed in, pinning him to the ground and cuffing his wrists behind his back. You're under arrest, one officer announced, reading him his rights. As they dragged Daniel away, Emily sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Ethan knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. It's over, he murmured, holding her tightly. He can't hurt you anymore. With Daniel finally behind bars, Emily and the twins began to heal. The weight of years spent looking over her shoulder lifted, replaced by a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in ages. Ethan stayed by her side every step of the way, proving through actions rather than words that he wasn't going anywhere. One evening, as they watched the twins play in the park, Emily turned to him with a soft smile. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. Ethan shook his head. I should be thanking you for giving me a second chance. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, there was no hesitation, no lingering doubt. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a new ring, simple yet elegant, just like the one she'd worn all these years. Emily Carter, he said, his voice trembling with emotion, will you give us another shot? Together we can build something real this time. Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Months later, Emily stood in front of a bustling community center she had founded with Ethan's support, a safe haven for women and children rebuilding their lives. As she watched families laugh and connect, she realized how far she'd come. Where are you from? She asked the audience gathered for the grand opening, echoing the question that had once sparked her own journey. Each of us carries scars, she continued, her voice steady and strong. But life has a way of bringing people together when we least expect it. Sometimes all it takes is one turning point, one act of kindness to change everything. Her gaze found Ethan in the crowd, and she smiled. Together, they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. And now, their story served as a beacon of hope for others, proving that even in the hardest moments, love and resilience could light the way forward.